So we'll have the runners with the microphones on each side. So if you have a question ready, feel free to raise your hand, and then we'll call on you from there. Okay, we have a question, yeah, back there.
My question is for Chuck. We heard a lot about how you learned from your past and how you developed your business, but I was wondering, what are you learning from your present, and what new lessons are you guys learning?
What was the last part you said?
What are you learning from your present state of life, and what you're learning from business now, as opposed to what you learned from before?
I'm not sure it's a lot different. It's all about applying the basics, the principles. Those all still work. Treating people well, whether it's your customers or your employees. If you don't treat your employees well, I don't know how you would expect them to treat your customers. I would say, if anything, what is clear to me today is the opportunities. There are just more opportunities today than there have ever been. I know it seems overwhelming at sometimes, but there's just, man, I'd love another start. I'd love to go back 45 years, 50 years and start all over again, because there are just so many great opportunities and so many tools to help take advantage of them. Of course, there's more competition, but just great opportunities is what I would say.
Amazing. Okay.
Kind of to bounce off that question, since you are in the music industry and since you were in the pancake industry, what allowed you to say yes to other things which, you know, you kind of are iffy about? Also, Chuck, you're a very humble man. I was actually a server for a wedding in Fort Wayne that you were a band and you were playing, I'm not sure, maybe the saxophone at the time, but I just laud you for that, because as a CEO and head of a company, you could easily say, no, I'm not going to do that, but you are allowing your time and allowed that to happen. So how else have you both just kind of said yes to things and like hope for the best?
Yeah, I would say from my point of view that I love all the opportunities that are presented to me, and maybe I should find that book that Peter talked about earlier about saying no. I probably should say no a little more often, but I don't sleep a lot. I sleep about 3 to 3.5 hours a night, so I do get time to do a lot of other things. But I just enjoy life. I enjoy all the different possibilities, and I have lots of interests. You know, I fly helicopters. I've got a big car collection. I actually work on them. I'm into electronics and just all kinds of different things. And with the limited amount of sleep that I do have more time to enjoy those sorts of things. And from a business point of view, I'm in a variety of businesses, but I love each one of them. I love how we can offer great things to customers and do it just a little bit better, offer the difference that maybe sometimes other companies don't do.
Yeah, I get a lot more sleep than Chuck does. I need more sleep. And maybe it's because I have 4 little kids and they take whatever energy I have. But I think it's hard at first. So at first, I feel like we were saying yes to so many things, and it almost became so distracting for Kodiak, because we would say yes to this opportunity and that opportunity, and you know, I mean, we once did private label for a few retailers, and private label, like, it's where we're making the product for them. We're not putting the Kodiak on there because it was bringing us revenue. We once sold to retailers that today I would never sell to, not because they're bad retailers, just because it wouldn't make sense for the brand. And so I think what happens is you say yes a ton in the beginning because you're just trying to get something to work. And then as other things start working, the amount of yeses you're saying start to become more focused, and you start saying no more often to different opportunities because it doesn't fit in line with where the business should be or where the brand should be. And so I think over time you say that, but still as entrepreneurs, I mean, it's hard to say no because there's so many opportunities and you want to say yes. And you know, I started finding where I was saying yes to a lot of people, various conversations. My wife's like, man, I thought you were supposed to be slowing down. And I'm like, yeah. I know, but it's so hard because this is interesting and this is interesting, and so I think you're almost always having to just prioritize your time and say, what do I really want to be doing? Where do I want to be spending my time, and what's energizing for me, and making sure that you're saying yes to those things.
Right here.
So I am a customer of both of yours, and Chuck, when you were talking about where those 250,000 guitars go, I invite you to my house because a lot of them are hanging on my wall right now.
Awesome, thank you.
Your team does a fantastic job, and the service really is amazing. So my question is really around, I know that about a year and a half or 2 years ago you sold to Providence, and it's a question for both of you, but I also had sold my company in '05, and I bought it back a couple of years later, and it's not that dissimilar to when Reebok spoke last year talking about the aftermath, if you will, of the sale. You both have created amazing cultures, and how do you maintain an amazing culture when you're privately owned? You have the ability to, let's say, overinvest because you can invest in the things that matter, culture, values. When you're public or private equity based, while they might say that that matters, at the end of the day, you know, it is the almighty dollar. That's why they've invested in your organization. So for both of you, you know, Cameron, as you step away, and Chuck, as you've, you know, sold the business, how do you go about ensuring that that culture that was really what you've been known for, and it's your legacy to some extent for all the families and associates that you've impacted, how do you keep that maintained?
We talked about this backstage. You know, it's choosing the right partner to start with. And I was fortunate that I didn't have to sell, didn't want to sell, and I thought I would die at my desk because I loved what I did. But it was just a timing that was incredible. And frankly, I looked at the way our country is set up with estate taxes and the kind of value our company was at that time. My wife and I were going to have to come up with many, many, many hundreds of millions of dollars. I didn't have that. I put every dollar back into the company to grow it. And this was one way to get a lot of cash to be able to do that, as well as start the foundation and frankly have a lot of other money and take care of people that have been with me a long time. But again, I didn't have to sell it. So I went into it pretty apprehensively, and I laid down some very high watermarks that were important to me. And you're absolutely right. I knew that in Fort Wayne, Indiana, my name, my brand would be there forever. So that was one of the things, among others, that I needed them to be able to pretty much agree to. And there were several others about the staff and the process. But I'd also say, you know, we're in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and we run a very efficient, very good company. It's in a state that's friendly to do business in. There's no reason for Providence to take our company back to Rhode Island or New York or LA or anywhere else. It's going to be more expensive. They're not going to get the employees, and so on and so forth. And then finally, I still own a big piece of it, and they don't know the music products business, so they depend a lot on me and my leadership team and so on and so forth. I'm very comfortable. It's been a year and, 8 months later, and I was saying earlier, they have not once come back and said a word about improving EBITDA or cutting employees. So, you know, the bottom line is, as long as the company performs and performs at the level we've been performing at, they're going to leave us alone. And as I said earlier, we had 42, now we have 44 years of every year, the top line and the bottom line are better than the year before. Through COVID, I was saying we had a 40% growth. It slowed down a little bit post-COVID, but, you know, we're still in double-digit growth, which is way better than any of the other companies they have. So far they're leaving us alone because we're doing a good job.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we were talking about this back there. I think private equity gets a really bad rap, and I think for some private equity groups, rightfully so, right? Because they come in and they just, you know, they're basically like those corporate raiders where they come in and they want to strip every little thing you're doing for profitability or for revenue growth, and they want to change everybody out because they see, hey, these people came up with you, but they don't have the experience. Let's bring in some really high professional people. But exactly what Chuck said, if you find the great people to work with in anything you're doing, whether you're hiring them as employees, whether you're partnering with them for financing, or whether you're working with them to sell your product, if you always focus on their intent and integrity, it'll get you to a lot better places. I find people who are so focused on what the value of their business is that they don't really care who they partner with, because they're like, hey, they're going to value my business at X dollars, so done, I'll do it. And a lot of times, a few years later, those people are bummed that they partnered with who they partnered with because they were just so focused on the dollar instead of focusing on asking the questions of, well, do you care about this, and how do you care about people, and how are you developing them, and how are you continuing to grow who we have here, and how do you care about culture? So I think if you're focusing on those things, you'll find the right partners, and then it just makes sense to sell when you sell, or to partner with who you partner with, and you'll be able to do everything that you hope to do.
This question is for Cameron.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm.
There we go.
We are the owners, or I'm the owner of a local CPG brand, and we actually have just started working with a few major retailers. And we launched statewide for 35 Meijer stores. And so my question is, how did you utilize, or how did you optimize getting your product off of the shelf? Because your problems don't start until your product gets on the shelf, I hear. And then, was there any methodical or strategic way that you went about selecting which retailers that you wanted to work with and which retailers that you were going to target, and how would you get in contact with the buyer and the person that you needed to speak to?
Yeah, those are some great questions, and I remember feeling all of the things that you're feeling of how do we grow and how do we get off the shelf. And when I first went to a Target meeting, and Cameron, you talked about this, I remember I went to Minneapolis, and I was pulling a suitcase with a griddle in there and a bowl, and it was basically like a pancake picnic for the buyer, and so. Like, I remember just being so nervous, and the buyer, after she called us, or sent an email actually, sent it like a few weeks later, like, hey, we're going to do a test on the product in like 40 stores. So they tested it throughout the U.S., and like we were so concerned about that because we didn't know how well it was selling. And so exactly to your question, it's one thing, like, there are so many hurdles to getting the product to work with retailers, and the first hurdle is getting it on the shelf. If you can get a product on the shelf, like, that's a really big hurdle. The next hurdle is getting consumers to know that it's on the shelf, and consumers to walk down that aisle and pick it off the shelf. And that's where we started trying a lot of different things, whether it was social media, whether it was events, whether it was sampling, like anything to just get other people talking about the product, which is where bloggers really helped us, which is where influencers really helped us. And so looking at various areas and identifying, hey, who can be kind of a megaphone for the brand in this area, and tell people to go to their stores and find it. And they would post it on their social pages. We did influencer events where we actually went to Chicago, went to New York, went to LA, and went to these various places, and we would bring in influencers that had, 50,000+ followers on Instagram, and we would make an event for them, and we would have them sample Kodiak products. We would talk about it. We'd give them products away, so when they were walking away, they're like, I went to this awesome event for Kodiak. It's a great product. I love it. And so that it was authentic, because we don't want to pay people, not because we were cheap, but not just because we were cheap, but because we wanted their promotion of the brand to be authentic. We wanted them to be saying, hey, I love this, instead of saying like, hey, I have to say this because they paid me so much. And so, like, the phase you're in, that's the grind, and that is a hard phase, and it's like you're doing everything you can. But that's where I would say, like, focusing on those retailers that have you today, that you're partnering with today, and making sure that it's selling really well there, then that's a story that you can start to tell other retailers. So you can go to another retailer and say, hey, you should carry our product because here's what we did over here, and here's how well it's working, and here's how well it's selling. And you can apply it. So what you've done is you've minimized the risk for them instead of saying, yeah, we're a brand new brand, I hope it works. My heart goes out to you because that is a hard phase.
You're right.
Hey, so I'm from Indiana, and I'm 23, and I've been building my company, and we sell online, and I have like 30-some employees now, and one of the hardest parts of my job is the people part, and I am really blessed to have a great team, but a lot of times I think I have the right person in the right seat, and then months go by or years go by, and you're like, okay, that's the wrong person, or they're not performing anymore, or whatever, and it's really hard as you've built a relationship with this person to let them go or move them. And I know you guys both done this and been this your whole life. So, and how do you guys deal with that, and what do you guys do?
Yeah, great question, and it's a fact. That's true what you're describing. I would tell you two things. In the early days, sometime that first person I hired for the first time in that role, it didn't work for them or for us. The second time usually worked better, and so that was one thing that happened in the early days. I did have to replace people, and I didn't know what the company was, and they didn't know what they were getting into. I would also say as the company grew, as long as we could grow faster, we could find another place for them. And so I always tried to do that. I was very compassionate, never wanted to hurt people, and tried to find another place that would work. There have been a few times, you have to make the hard decision, and it's really hard when someone's been with you for a while. And I'll tell you a small story. It was probably, 8, 9 years ago or so. We were having a management retreat, which we did every fall. And at that year, we had done about $600 million of business. And I said, we're coming up, the way we're growing, we're going to be a $1 billion company really soon. And I said this to all, they had about 30 managers and leaders with me, and I said, I need you all to think about that. And none of us, including myself, have ever run a $1 billion company. What do we need to be prepared to do that well? And if you need education, I'm all in, I'll support you on it. If we need more tools, I'll support you on it. But we have to, for the sake of the rest of the employees, make sure we're prepared to run that $1 billion company. Well, we've since gone past that, and we're zooming in on $2 billion now. There were a couple employees that didn't make it. Most of them did, but there were a couple that we just outgrew and had to make other changes for them. But it's hard. It's always hard. So.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, the one piece I would add to that I've learned is, as a leader, you have to identify a few things. So, one, you have to identify what the culture is that you want and how you want the feeling to be. What's the environment? What's the community that you're building in your organization? Now, that's whether you're hiring people or whether that's you're an employee, right? Like, everyone contributes to the culture. And then the other thing is, when you're talking about the bus, it's, okay, does this person fit on the bus? Because sometimes people just might not be in the right seats, but they still contribute to the community that you're building, and you don't want to lose them. And so you just need to put them in a different seat. And so sometimes it's, hey, we need to keep them on the bus. They're just in the wrong seat. And sometimes they're in the right seat, but you don't want them on the bus, right? So that's where, as a leader, like, you have to identify those things, and you have to make those hard decisions because you have to know where you want to go and where you want the culture to go.
And you have to do it for the rest of the employees.
Yeah.
And I haven't had to I've never laid anybody off. I had to fire a few people. I will tell you, in almost every case that I've let someone go, 6 months later they come back to me and say thank you, and they're in a better position. They're happier. I'm happier. Everybody's fine. So.
Yeah.
It's big encouragement.
Hi.
Yeah.
My name is JR. Our foundation created an Arts for Vets program to combat veteran suicide, but we're a small organization trying to go national. So how do you recommend, someone like us to reach your organization, get on the top of the pile to be looked at for funding or support or something like that?
You want to take it?
I don't know. In our particular case, now that we have a foundation, we have some really strong pillars. There's an application process online, and it describes what those pillars are. If you fit, then it's possible you'd get money donated to. But we're pretty specific today. I wish I could support everything. We support about 600 organizations right now. We've given away about $30 million in the last 2 years, which is more than I ever thought I'd give away. But there's just not enough to support everything. So I don't know.
This is a question for Chuck. It's cool to hear how you feel about your hometown. Is it your hometown? Fort Wayne. And I'm so curious to know what advice you'd give to South Bend. Like, what could South Bend do differently? And what has Fort Wayne done to reach where it is now? And kudos to Fort Wayne, and I'm a big proponent of South Bend.
It's a complicated and deep story about Fort Wayne, but I would say 13 years ago, we had a great mayor at the time and city councilmen, and they wanted to build a ballpark downtown. And most of the residents, in fact, more than 85% of the residents said, we don't need a ballpark downtown. We already have a ballpark out at our Coliseum. And myself and several other business guys went in front of city council and said, it's not about a ballpark, it's about an investment downtown. And I got to give the city council a lot of credit. They approved it in spite of what most of the citizens wanted. And the ballpark got built. The next year it was the #1 minor league ballpark in the country. It's been going now for, I don't know, 12 or 13 years, and every year but one of those, it's been voted the #1 minor ballpark in the whole country. We've had other cities come visit us, see what we're doing. They do 70 baseball games there a year. They do 700 other events. But what it really did is it gave the citizens of Fort Wayne the confidence to allow us to invest in ourselves and puff our chests out just a little bit more. And based on that ballpark, we ended up getting a new hotel. We got a new office building at third base, and then someone else decided to invest in an 8-story downtown tower. We opened up our riverfronts, and it goes on and on and on. I'm personally in the process right now building an $85 million building right in downtown. We have our swagger going on, if you will, for Fort Wayne. And every time we move a step forward, there's a little more people that get on the bus, and just a big movement in Fort Wayne right now. It's, again, as I said earlier, one of the cities in the country that's actually growing in population. And Indianapolis is even looking at Fort Wayne going, what are you guys doing up there? So, but it took the confidence of the citizens and a few business leaders to step up and make things happen.
Hi guys. First of all, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it. Second off, both of you spoke very slightly on your faith, and I was wondering if you could just expand. How do you maintain your relationship with God while you're running these larger companies that don't necessarily vocalize those values?
Yeah, I can start. I love the question. Being in Utah from a larger family, like faith is really important to me. It's important to my kids. I can very strongly say that without God, I wouldn't be where I'm at. I mean, He so much, just so much guiding along the way, and I've looked at it and I'm like, I am not some super smart, intelligent person. And to be leading Kodiak to where it was, I'm like, how and why? And so constantly I would ask, like, all right, what am I supposed to be learning, and how am I supposed to be improving? And Joel and I talked a lot about this. Like, we want a culture where people feel supported and they feel cared about, and so I think we never wanted people to feel like in our organization it was a really strong religion or a different one, because we know that so many people come from so many different backgrounds. But we wanted to support people in whoever they are and whatever they're doing. So there was a faith-based podcast I was recently on called All In, and it gave me an opportunity to just weave in what were some of those stories along the way where I saw God impacting my life or my family's life, and He has a plan. He knows each and every one of us. We are He loves us. He's supporting us, and it's just cool sometimes to see His plan unfolded. And so I think sometimes we might not talk about it a lot because we don't want to come across like preachy or come across and or feel like we're condemning anyone. I think it's more just, hey, when you can work knowing that there's a higher power in what you're doing, that what you're doing is not just about the money that you're making or the title that you have, but it's about how do you help other people see that they can enjoy work and they can spend more time with their family because they're not as stressed at work.
Yeah, and I would agree with everything Cameron said. At Sweetwater, anybody that knew me knew I was a believer, and we clearly had those values within our company, but frankly, we sold to everybody, and I didn't want my faith to be so strong that I would offend or not be able to serve customers. I want to love everybody, and that's what I love doing. I love that I always thought of Sweetwater as a ministry, and we just didn't tell people it was a ministry until they'd done business with us and couldn't figure out what was different about us. And so I'm just really thankful that I was in a position to help so many people.
Chuck, Cameron, thanks for being here. This has been really fascinating. And you mentioned, Chuck, a moment ago, something that's been on my mind, I think, most of the morning, the word confidence. It just feels like you need to have a lot of confidence to do what you guys have accomplished. And so I think my question is, does that come naturally to you? Do you do personal development that helps you gain some of that confidence? Is it just years of experience? What would you tell people to help them try to up their level of confidence when, doing something like this in their lives?
You probably wouldn't believe this, but I'm incredibly shy and normally wouldn't have a lot of confidence. Frankly, unlike probably everyone in this room, I have no college. I'm self-educated, as I said before, and so in the early days, I did not have confidence. But I also knew I couldn't give up. Failure is not an option. There's always a way, and I believe that. There's just always a way. The more success you got, the more confidence you built. And one of the things as a leader is really hard. Like, I instantly know the answer. But when I have a room of other leaders, I want to hear their opinion. So I tend to be the last to speak. I have 2 ears and only one mouth. It's really difficult sometimes for me at this point to not just know the answer and blurt it out and let's move forward, because that's what everybody would do when I owned the company. But I made a real effort to hear everybody's thoughts, and then at some point I would ground the plane, if you will, and make the decision. But confidence came with just success of the company. And especially today, as I look at all the other companies I have, almost every one of them I bought in a distressed situation. But it was so obvious to me, the reason it was distressed were things that were easy to fix. It was the right customer service need to be applied. We got to get some marketing going. You got to have some resources to make it happen. And I literally have turned every one of the companies around that I've purchased, and that clearly is confidence today. But I didn't have that in the early days. But I really leaned on anything's possible, and failure is not an option. I would also say in the early days when I was building a recording studio in Fort Wayne, Indiana, whether it was in the VW bus or the mobile home or finally my 1,000 square foot house, all of my friends, whether they were friends or professionals, they would go, recording studio in Fort Wayne, that makes no sense. You need to go to Nashville, you need to go to LA, you need to go to New York. And frankly, they weren't very encouraging, in fact, discouraging. And I tell a joke, which is probably not so funny today, but I think the first 20 years of my life, my friends and family would say, when are you getting a real job? Well, they don't ask me that anymore, especially as I employ them or their friends and that sort of stuff. But what I would say is, you had to have, I was smart enough to have some advisors around me, and, same thing, they weren't particularly supportive. And it was, I'm sure in the early days I got discouraged. What I would say today, having the wisdom to look back, it was a little bit arrogant of me to think they would understand the dream that was in my head. And maybe unlike what Peter said this morning, I thought it was important to share my dream, and I still believe that I should have shared my dream. I should have taken input from others, which I tried to, but at some point it's your dream. They don't speak the language that you're thinking in your head, and you just have to go forward with what your dream, and failure is not an option. Take their advice, but if you believe in something so strong, just be all in, and I mean all in. The last thing I'd say, and I don't mean to preach on this, I mentor a lot of young people, and they're really excited to start their own business, and I'll quickly ask them why. Well, I don't want to work for the man. I want to work, only 30 hours, all those sorts of things. Well, if that's why you want to be in business, that's just wrong, because in the early days, you got to be all in, and 30 hours is a joke from my point of view if you want to be successful, because there's lots of other people that are working 40, 50, 60 hours, and if you want to be competitive, if you want to win, you've got to have that sort of drive and aptitude to really go after it. Again, you have to balance it, as I said earlier today, but you just got to be all in, and failure is not an option.
I'll add one point too, because I love the question, because confidence, sometimes you can feel it from other people, and you're like, man, I wish I had that confidence they have. But I think what it is, and Chuck hit on this, it's believing in yourself.
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes we don't believe in ourselves. When someone believes in us, then we feel like we can take on the world, because we're like, hey, if they believe in me, I can do this. All right, I need that. But once they leave, then it's, I just don't think I can do that. And we just continue to have all this negative talk inside our head that we can't get out. And so we're just constantly telling ourselves how bad we are, how they're smarter than we are, and so on and so forth. But once you believe in yourself, and so I think that it comes across as confidence, but just like Chuck said, it's all these things going inside your head, but you just believe that you can do it. And at Kodiak, we believed, well, if other people can do it, we can figure it out too. And so it wasn't necessarily confidence so much as it was just, we just had that belief in ourselves. And so I think that's where, if I would tell anyone to anchor anywhere, it would just anchor on believing in yourself and believing that you can do what anyone else can do, and the only person holding you back is yourself, and don't let anyone hold you back.
Awesome. We have time for 2 more questions we'll take here.
Hi, Chuck. Hey, Cameron. Thank you for being here. It'll be redundant, but thank you. Your stories are very inspiring for most of us that we are young people coming into the real world and starting our journey. What piece of advice would you give to somebody that is starting his life and starting to build a business and trying to get out there and succeed in what they're doing? And what do you think is more important? Do you think hard work is more important or smart work into putting into that?
That's a trick question.
That is a trick question. Both. Unlike what we talked about a little while ago, I think it's important to say yes to everything you can. Get as much experience early on as you can. If you're trying to learn a business, go watch other people, ask folks to be mentors, go volunteer work. I mean, just get as much experience as you can and say yes everywhere you can. Then later, if you want to fine-tune stuff, that's fine. But you will find that most people that have had a little bit of success are okay with sharing it with others. They like sharing it with others. And so that's what I'd say early on. But it's just hard work. It's just hard work.
Yeah,
the harder you work, the luckier you get, or however they say that. You know, people talk about me being lucky all the time, and I go, yeah, okay. But I know in my head, I just worked hard. So.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, opportunities come through that work, and I think so. I'll give you a quick story to that. When I first started working with Joel, we had sold to a bunch of like gift shops in Park City, Yellowstone, all of these type of places. And so Joel said to me, he's like, hey, why don't you call some of these gift shops that haven't ordered Kodiak in a handful of years? And the hard-working side of me was like, okay, you got it. And so I started calling some of the gift shops, and I went name by name, and I'd call them up and say, hey, we have some samples of Kodiak. I'd love for you guys to buy it again. And they were like, yeah, I mean, can you send me some samples? I'm like, yeah, but you have to pay for the sample and pay for shipping, which I mean, they weren't going to do. And so I found that I was banging my head against the wall, but I still continued to work hard. And then the working smart piece of this for me was, well, wait a second. If I can call a Meijer store that has over 200 stores and talk to one person, and they can bring it into 200, maybe that's a better call. And so I think what I would say is you need both, and you need to incorporate both. And while you're working really hard, as you're trying to innovate what you're doing, you'll be thinking of better ways to be doing what you're doing so you can do it more efficiently and spread it out. So then that might cause you to work smarter. So like, couple them both together and then learning from everyone, they'll just set you up for whatever you're doing going forward.
Oh, you're right there.
I just want to talk about generosity. Chuck, when I was incarcerated at the Heritage Correctional Facility in Plainfield, Indiana, a small group of us at the chapel put together letters over and over to Sweetwater asking for a donation for our praise and worship team. Sweetwater went above and beyond and donated sound equipment, guitars, amps, drums, gave us the whole nine. So we just thank you for that.
Thank you.
We just really praise the Lord for moving on your heart so that we can worship the God that transformed the lives for those of us on the inside. Why is generosity such a vital importance to you in your organizations?
Wow. My wife and I have been incredibly blessed. And I just want to help others, and I want to love everybody. And it's a fact that the more we do, the more we're given. And of course, we have responsibility to then give more. And we're just in a fortunate position. And I want to love everybody. That's what I would say.
Great. All right, again, Chuck, Cameron, thank you guys so much for joining us, and thank you for coming out this morning. If you you have any other questions or anything of that such, we'll be around shortly, but other than that, thank you guys so much for attending, and we look forward to next year as well.
Thank you, everyone.